All right, now that you have written an intro, a thesis, an outline, you are ready to actually start writing the paper. And we've practiced in the past writing argument paragraphs a lot. We have discussed argument structure. We've done a lot of this kind of writing. What we haven't done is adding sources to writing. So I want to show you what that could look like. So when I write, I don't always do this, but sometimes I find it useful to write the argument portion of my essay first and then add the sources afterwards. And it does require quite a lot of rewriting when I do that, but I find it useful when I am trying to make my argument central. This is the wrong one. It's this one. When I'm trying to make my argument central, I actually find it more useful to try to write my argument first before I hear what other people have to say. So I have this essay we wrote for AP Lang a couple years ago about having a creativity class in school. So it says, according to the Torrance test, an international measure of creativity, individuals around the world seem to struggle more each year with expressing creative thought. If creativity is the ability to consider a problem and apply knowledge in a unique way, then this new lack of innovation will impede new developments across disciplines. As Ralph Waldo Emerson claimed, imitation is suicide. Creativity is the means to progress, and without it, we are doomed to cultural stagnation. Many people propose that we address this creativity crisis in the classroom with a course specifically designed to teach creativity. As potentially debilitating as the crisis is, this plan is redundant and ineffective because adept teachers in all subjects already teach their students how to think creatively. Instead of creating a separate class to promote creativity, we need to promote a culture of creativity in our schools, refocusing our attention on critical thinking rather than standardized test taking. So that's a long little funnel intro here. There was one area that was driving me crazy where I repeated something. I'm sure you're seeing it, telling me there it is. Okay, so it moves in a bit of a funnel pattern. I don't think this is a hook. I think I start kind of broad and move smaller. And then I've gone through as I've written this essay, and I have underlined things that I would like to do more research on, because I know that my writing is going to be more credible if I add sources to back up what I am saying, rather than just making people rely on me, because I am not an expert in this, right? And I need to rely on other people's expertise. So I go on, and I probably won't include any sources besides the Emerson in my intro. It's usually a good idea to save the sources for the body paragraphs. I say, while minor changes such as adding a creativity class to the curriculum might seem more realistic, we need to instead rethink the assumptions and priorities that guide our education system. Since George Bush enacted his No Child Left Behind legislation in 2001, testing has become the standard means of both assessing and communicating student growth. While standardized testing can be useful for determining a lack of objective knowledge in certain disciplines, students are actively learning to identify the single right answer rather than exploring various options. Because school funding depends on the results of these tests, teachers are then forced to lead students to these right answers rather than encouraging original thinking. So this is my paragraph where I am describing the problem. And you'll notice I've done this throughout until, I've marked things that could use a little bit more research. And so I've got this argument going, and I want to show you what happens after I've done the research. Okay, so let's say now I look at those underlined portions, I get on the online databases, I look in for you guys, your American Dream packets, and I find the sources that I can use to back up that info. Let's just look at my first body paragraph to see how I'm doing that. While minor changes such as adding a creativity class to the curriculum might seem more realistic, we need to instead rethink the assumptions and priorities that guide our education system. That's the same. Since George Bush enacted his No Child Left Behind legislation in 2001, testing has become the standard means of both assessing and communicating student growth. Okay, here's where I'm going to start in with my sources. I'm not quoting. I could use more quote, like the quote paraphrase method that I've taught you, but the first one I decided decide to just use paraphrase, I liked the way that it was fitting into my ideas. So I say NCLB, which is No Child Left Behind, imposed a system in which public schools had to test and improve the performances of their schools every year or risk losing their funding. I got this from a woman named Diane Ravitch. It was an online article, so there's no page number. So I just cited her last name. In some extreme cases, schools have even been shut down because they could not meet these requirements. And I got this from somebody named Goodwin. Okay, what I want you to notice here is I have not just relied on one source to back up my argument. I have found multiple sources about No Child Left Behind to back up that argument. So I've got Ravitch, I've got Goodwin, and I'm about to get somebody named McClure. And the way to think about this is like, pretend that you entered a conversation. You walked into a room and 8 people are in there and they're all talking about the same thing. In this case, they're all talking about No Child Left Behind and standardized testing. So I come into the room with my limited sets of expertise. I teach in a classroom, so I do have some stake in this argument, but these people in front of me have done a bunch of research. So let's say Diane Ravitch says something, and then I forgot what Goodwin's first name is, but Goodwin says something. I would not be a good conversationalist if I just jumped in and said my own point of view. A good conversationalist, and we talked about this when we were talking about discussions, they are building off what other people have said. So if Ravitch says that I'm in danger of losing my funding, pretend. So Diane Ravitch is like, if people don't do well on standardized tests, the school can lose funding. And Goodwin says, when they do that, Diane, our schools are shut down. Well, then I come in and I say, it's interesting what Diane Ravitch said here about us losing our funding. And then I can't believe that our schools could be shut down by this. So it seems like, and I'm going to go down here, that educators own ability to think creatively are being stifled because they're worried about their schools being shut down. So you see how I'm building off all those conversations and I'm adding them together. And that makes my point a lot more believable. So let's keep going with the paragraph. It says, because schools are so worried about losing funding, educators have increasingly shifted their focus towards teaching test-taking skills rather than critical thinking. Again, McClure is building off what Goodwin said, who's building on what Ravitch said. Thus, although the No Child Left Behind Act was meant to address a lack of resources in our nation's most at-risk populations, it was turned into a testing mandate. And that's where I've used that paraphrase quote method. I think that phrase testing mandate is really important. And so that's why I used it from Ravitch. Teachers felt that the government was stifling an educator's own ability to think creatively in the classroom. All right, so the main thing to learn here is remember that metaphor about being in a conversation with your sources. You're not just saying, he thinks this, I think that. You're saying, he thinks this, and that relates to what she said, and what she said relates to what I said. So you're showing the relationships between them. You can kind of think of it as a bit like compare and contrast. I'm going to compare and contrast what the sources are saying. And ultimately, I'm going to make my argument central, because even entering a conversation with experts, don't you still feel like you're kind of the one in the right? At least after hearing what they have to say and kind of building on what they have to say and informing your opinion, you're like, okay, now I have a point of view that is worth sharing. So that is always central. Okay, I hope that this was helpful to you. Now is time to start writing your body paragraphs.